So, we've been talking about imperialism and how America has grown, gaining territory, gaining influence, gaining power in this late 1800s, early 1900s time frame. So much so that you can see from this political cartoon that America spans about 10,000 miles from our territories that we have east of our continent and west of our continent. So you can kind of see that with our eagle here in this cartoon. Now, the thing about imperialism is obviously we know a little bit about why we're doing it and we're gaining resources and all that, but there is a group of people who don't agree with imperialism and don't agree with our country doing this, and they're called anti-imperialists. So that's who we're going to be talking about a little bit more in depth right now, especially talking about their reasoning behind why they don't agree with imperialism. So the first thing to know about anti-imperialists is that they are a minority, but they're a very vocal minority. So there's not a whole lot of them, but you can hear a lot from what they're saying. And they're also very, very different. So the anti-imperialists aren't all collectively disagreeing with imperialism for the same reason. They have a lot of different reasons, and some of those reasons even contradict each other. And so we'll get into that a little bit more today. Really, the only thing they agree on is that imperialism is harmful to the people in the territories being taken over and to the country doing the taking over, which for us, is the United States, okay? So the best way to do this is to break it down a little bit more, so that's kind of what we're going to do. So the first kind of reasoning of being against imperialism is economics. There you go, is economics. Economically, you kind of have two different sides. So you have one group of anti-imperialists who say that economically imperialism is bad for us because it costs money for us, our government, to imperialize. They have to pay soldiers, they have to pay for weaponry, because most of the times when we imperialize, we're doing so with our military. We're sending in ships, we're sending in soldiers in order to take over land that we feel like is very valuable to us, even if there are already people on it. So that's obviously going to be expensive. Plus, most of those areas, it's not like you can just have someone that's already there govern that. We're going to have to set up our own, what we would refer to as a colonial government in that area, which is also going to be continually costing us money as that colonial government is in that country. So both of these things are going to cost us a lot of money, and people say that it's not worth it because it's costing us so much money to imperialize, we shouldn't do it. Now, on the other hand, you have a group of anti-imperialists who economically don't like imperialism because it quite literally can cost them their job. So you have workers and labor union members and that group that we've talked about before that are very upset about imperialism because with these new people being added to our country, that's what a territory is, it's being added to our country, then jobs can actually go to those territories, and a lot of times those workers will work for cheaper pay. So these labor union workers who are already fighting for better pay and better working conditions now have an even less likelihood of getting those things because there's more workers available that companies could turn to instead. So you can kind of see there's two different economic arguments going on there. Oh, it just froze. That is still doing stuff. And now for the political reasons that our anti-imperialists don't agree with imperialism, is really the fact that they're kind of learning from history already. So they've already seen the European nations that have gone into Asia and Africa and have been colonizing and imperializing in those places. And it's just led to a lot more fighting and a lot more war. It's really led to just a big ugly mess as those countries divide up these other areas that they don't view as being as civilized. So a lot of anti-imperialists say, well, if we stay out of imperialism, we're not going to have that same kind of political mess of kind of having more conflict with foreign powers, because we won't be in those same areas where they're fighting over land if we stay out of those areas. So political reason is not going to war with other countries. Now, the other kind of category is a little bit weird, but it's not. Anti-imperialists feel like imperialism is just not really American. So these anti-imperialists point out that the whole idea of imperialism and taking over other places contradicts some of those foundational American ideals that we kind of, built our country around. So the idea that people are free and equal, that a government should be determined by the people and for the people. If we really believe in those guiding principles, then can we believe in going in and taking an area of land and enforcing our rule upon them, oftentimes by force and without any input at all from the people that we are taking over the land from? So our anti-imperialists are basically arguing this is not American because you're not following the principles that we created our country on. The last reasoning that our anti-imperialists have, and this one is kind of like a weighty one, is actually kind of racial issues. So you have some racial reasons that are given by different imperialists, and you'll see that some of these kind of make sense, and then others are super racist in their foundation. But on one hand, you do have a group of people who say that the idea of the white man's burden, which we've already kind of mentioned, is unnecessary and condescending. That it portrays foreign people as being negative and as being less than, and that's not true. So you do have some anti-imperialists that are full-on sticking up for these other, foreign racial groups that, we're trying to imperialize. So there are some people who are willing to stand up and do that, that kind of thing. You also have people who basically say, we got enough stuff going on here in our own country, okay? We got Jim Crow to deal with. We have discrimination to deal with. We have segregation going on still for a very long time. And we need to be dealing with what's going on here before we reach out and start dealing with stuff going on in other countries. We got our own stuff to deal with. So that's another kind of issue. And again, it's brought up very frequently in terms of race, which is why I mentioned specifically Jim Crow, discrimination, and segregation. Okay? So that is one of our kind of three different reasonings that people bring up race and anti-imperialism. The third one is where things turn a little racist. Okay, so just a little warning, a little heads up. But you have some anti-imperialists who say we shouldn't be taking over these other places, typically with groups of people who are of another race, because they are inferior, and so if we incorporate them into the United States, it makes us inferior. Okay? Again, I know, very, very racist. We're talking 1890s here, that is the way that people thought, okay? And a lot of that goes back to that nativism that we were talking about when we talked about immigration. So people who just don't like stuff they view as foreign or different. So they're afraid that if these other people who they don't see as equals are part of our country, it's going to drastically change our society. So you do have that viewpoint as well, okay? So hopefully now you can figure out, there are a myriad of reasons why people didn't like imperialism. Some of them actually make sense and we probably shouldn't be doing some of the stuff we're doing. And some of them are a little bit questionable. But yeah, there's tons of reasons why people didn't like imperialism. They just weren't the majority of Americans at the time.